And welcome everybody to the latest edition of Terms Defined, starring special guest Eugene Bagashov, Eugene the Philostopher, and this one's about nationalism. I think there's tons of things to say about this. Things like Belarus sucks and the U.S. rules. No, I'm just kidding, but seriously, that is sort of a manifestation of nationalism. And so just to kind of give a little introduction here, Eugene the Philostopher, we've had him on some other Terms Defined videos. I think we talked about socialism twice. Eugene, how goes it?
Well, again, it could have been better, but hello, everyone listening to this, and thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us once again from Belarus, former Soviet state.
Yeah, and it, again, as I've said in our videos about socialism, it's like considered to be the most Soviet of post-Soviet states. So,
Yes. So when it comes to nationalism, I guess one of the things I'm most interested in talking about is the way it's constantly demonized on social media. So one of the ways that mainstream media and so on, and people on social media, they're constantly accusing people of being nationalists. And so, like for instance, Eugene is white. For all of you who viewed his channel and so on, I think he may be even whiter than me. Eugene's very, very white, and if he has like pride in his own country, if he likes Belarus, he's now a white nationalist, which I guess in some kind of bizarre mental gymnastics makes people believe that he's a racist, which makes no sense. And so here's one of the biggest beefs that I have with the demonization of nationalism. It's that I approach most politics from an economic perspective, and the idea that nationalism is a bad thing is just ridiculous to me. For instance, if Canadian bacon was actually better, I would want to go on vacation to Canada, and people in Canada, and I'm just using this as just a hypothetical example, I would prefer to go on vacation there because the bacon is so good. Now everybody knows Canadian bacon's just ham, but the point is, it benefits both economies, and it makes everybody more sophisticated, and it makes everybody's lives more enriched, and their pockets more full, and more economic exchange of things like ideas and culture and food and so on. So I don't see the problem with it. I think it's a ridiculous notion to suggest that it's a bad thing. And if chances are, if I lived in Italy right next to Switzerland, I would prefer that Switzerland kind of stays like Switzerland and Italy stays like Italy, so that we can appreciate one another.
That makes sense, but you made a lot of points, and I don't even know where to start. But what you said about the, let's say, international trade, like buying other countries' products, is completely true in my books. Like, again, I think international trade makes everyone better off than otherwise. And again, when, let's say, one country introduces certain tariffs or quotas on imports from other countries, it's actually harmful for both of the countries. Like, let's say, again, take this recent example of the trade war, probably in air quotes, between the U.S. and China, for example, when the U.S. Introduced some new tariffs on like Chinese cars or whatever, I don't know. What it really is going to make is like the lobbyists inside of your country, for example, are advocating for these measures to be taken for them to get more profits. Like, let's say you ban cars from Japan in the US, it means that the US car producers get more profits because people are forced essentially by the government to buy the US cars instead of Japanese cars, even though Japanese cars might be cheaper and higher quality, etc.
Right.
But the people are forced to buy the more expensive and lesser quality US. I'm not saying they are. I'm just
and so
this is an example. So and what this makes is it basically benefits the people who produce more expensive and worse products versus people who produce
and it makes
cheaper and better products. And
You pay more
at your expense. So you lose more money.
Right.
You get worse products. So you cannot spend more money on other things that you could otherwise buy, like, let's say, I don't know, extra bag of milk or whatever.
Right.
From your local farmer. So your economy suffers because of that.
And can I just interrupt you a minute? And
yeah,
so what you're bringing up here is an important point, that it's another misconception about nationalism. It's the idea that when the government issues an artificial interference in economics known as a tariff, that's somehow pro-nationalist for the country that imposes the tariff, which is a ridiculous idea. That's not.
It's certainly
it makes
pro-lobbyist.
It's pro-lobbyist. It's pro-big government. It's pro-higher taxes and worse products and higher prices.
Yeah, so small group of people benefit from that totally, like the owners of these companies, domestic companies.
Right.
But, everyone in the country, like the regular John,
consumers
from it.
Right, exactly.
And if you think about it a little bit more, you'll see that in the long term, even those big guys, those lobbyists, would also suffer because the whole economy shrinks because of that. But they they don't think long term, They just need money right now, so they get it at your expense.
Less choices in the economic marketplace don't ever benefit the consumer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so before we talk anything else about nationalism, perhaps the viewers have noticed that we have this kind of rolling background here, and we've included the Belarusian flag, and I'm very interested to know what the symbolism is there. It's got this white field. The part where it attaches to the pole has this rectangular white field with this red-colored, like a lace pattern almost inside of it. Perhaps it could be the tetrahedron that is the world. I'm not totally sure about that. And then you've got these two differently sized green and red bars. There it is. Now it's on the screen.
Yeah, well, there's actually a pretty complicated story about the flag, and I mean, I can talk about it for like an hour maybe, but I'll try to make it short. So when Belarus was firstly established, that was right when the Russian Empire crumbled, so roughly the First World War, so 1917, I think, or something. And then we've had our first flag. One guy developed it, and it was just a 1/3 white, horizontal bars, white, red, white. So that was our first flag. Although some nationalists here claim that it's much older, but we actually know that it's not old. It's only at the beginning of 20th century. But
and anyway, it's so basic. It's like so many European flags that are just simply 3 bars, like,
it's
so many countries.
Very much like Austrian flag, which is like crimson, white, crimson, but it's kind of inverted,
Okay, right.
But anyway, so that was our first flag, but then we've only existed as an independent country for a couple of years, and then Soviet Union came about, and we've had this more or less our current flag, this just a 2/3 red bar and 1/3 green bar. That was our Soviet Union flag, and with obviously a hammer and a sickle, a yellow one in the corner.
Oh, you got to have the hammer and sickle.
Yeah, it was a very typical Soviet Republic flag. There were a total of 15 Soviet republics, like Russia, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Belarus, etc., etc. And all of them had pretty much roughly the same design of a flag. It was like 2/3 red and 1/3 of something, like blue or whatever. You can look it up. They're really all, almost all the same. And this is our Soviet flag. This is the 2/3 red, 1/3 green. And when we gained independence after the Soviet Union in 1991, we returned to our first flag, this white, red, white. But there was a referendum after our current president came into power in 1994. There was a referendum in 1995.
Wow.
Which was about, like, should we go back to this Soviet flag, basically? And apparently people voted for it. Like,
of course.
It was probably rigged, but anyway. So the propaganda about it was that, oh, the Nazi collaborators used this national flag, white, red, white, so it was associated with Nazis, basically. Well, because Nazis just took whatever was available, so whatever.
They had a white and a red piece of cloth, so they just did what they could.
Yeah, they just said, well, it's your flag, okay, let's use it, why not? I mean, but anyway, so there was this piece of propaganda that it's a Nazi flag, essentially, so let's ban it, let's use our Soviet flag instead.
Right.
So we since then, we use our Soviet flag, but we just removed the hammer and a sickle, and we added this piece of ornament on the left.
What is that piece of ornament on the left? That was the only part I was interested in. All the rest of it I knew was just arbitrary nonsense. Like, do the colors even represent anything, or is it just because nobody else is using those colors?
Well,
and who has a 2/3 bar? I've never seen a 2/3 bar. Now, I know there are some weirder flags than yours, but that red 2/3 bar is just weird looking. It looks like it's top heavy or something. And
jokingly we call it here a sunset above the swamp. So green is the swamp and the red is the sunset. But
I love that.
Well, it actually there are many interpretations, but of course it's just a random Soviet flag. But people came up with interpretations like, red represents the blood of our people that all the wars and stuff.
Yeah.
Represents the lushness of our land, etc., and our beautiful fields and whatnot.
They needed two. It was so bloody there that they needed 2 fields of red.
It was very bloody. I mean, even now we have less population than at the beginning of the 20th century.
But seriously,
2 world wars. I mean, we were fucked more than anyone else by the world wars.
What is that ornamentation, though? What is that? That's what I want to know. That's the tetrahedron. That's the tetrahedron that we know is the Earth.
It was also produced at the beginning of the 20th century by some village woman.
Just a lady with an Etch-a-Sketch just drew this thing up, or what? Like,
yeah, she just kind of saw it, S-O-W, or sawn.
Okay.
Say?
Oh, yeah. She sewed it. Okay.
Yeah.
What the hell?
It's a very traditional pattern that can be seen in our clothing, for example.
Like on a quilt. Right.
And yeah. So we have a huge culture of flax. Like most of our clothes, like traditional clothes, are made of flax, and there's a lot of weaving and sewing kind of thing to that. And it's mostly like the most traditional kind of clothing. It's like this white flaxy kind of thing with some red stuff on it.
Okay, right.
That was like a parade uniform of a peasant, let's say.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so
it almost reminds me of like what is it? Kazakhstan. It almost looks like Bavaria, like the way the clothing is. I don't know how to explain it. It's very northern Europe. Northeast, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, Germany and Slavic peoples, they're all more or less the same. Yeah. In this respect, at least. I mean, there was obviously a huge cultural exchange over the centuries.
Yeah. And so, are those like hearts and diamonds? Those are like literally heraldry symbols on there, right?
I don't think they have any meaning, honestly. I mean, probably somebody invoked some symbolism into it, but I don't think so. But I mean, if you're really like Thunderbolt struck dude, you can see some Squatterman patterns here.
Oh no!
Like Parat Squatterman, but
it's proof that Minsk was formed on a Birkeland current.
Well, yeah, probably.
A Birkeland current, which formed the swamp, also formed the inspiration, and it formed a Birkeland current in some guy's brain, and he grew a crazy beard and mustache, and he was very bald and pasty, and he figured out that the Birkeland current connected Minsk and the mantle. The Earth's hollow inside, but there's a tetrahedron inside of that.
Well, speaking about Minsk, by the way, we are actually, the whole country is very low. Like we're like really a lowlands, swamplands.
And do you own a set of hip waders? That's
what?
Do you own a set of hip or chest waders?
I don't know what it is.
Oh, it's like rubber boots that come all the way up to your chest.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Sorry.
You know, like
anyway,
like
what I wanted to
rubber
say
boots.
is that we're really low, and there's a lot of swamps, especially like the whole south of our country is basically just swamps. But Minsk is actually sitting on a large hill, so we're roughly speaking higher than the rest of the country. But
right.
We're only like 300 meters above sea level, so in Minsk, I mean. So yeah.
300 meters? I think you're actually higher than I am. But
well, it could be, but again, in the U.S., I've been to places that are like a couple of kilometers above sea level, like Flagstaff, in Arizona, or
okay, nice.
Other places like that. So yeah.
Did you go to Humphreys Peak while you're there? Because the high point of Arizona
I don't
is.
Remember, to be honest.
It's a giant mountain. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, but you can I think you can drive to within about 4 miles of the peak, and then you got to walk it's like 2 to 4 miles, and you go over the second highest peak in Arizona on your way. I didn't actually go to it, but I drove past. You can see it for hundreds of miles when you're driving toward it.
Well, I certainly stayed at the motel in Flagstaff, right next to the San Francisco Peaks. So that was kind of cool. It's a really cool place. Like literally, when we were driving there, it was actually one of the few instances, actually maybe the only instance in my life when I experienced, the airplane changes of pressure in a car. Like almost, when an airplane takes off, you need to swallow to your ears kind of.
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah.
So, and it was in the car, and it was amazing to me. Like, wow, we're like moving 100 meters above the ground. I mean, vertically, basically, So
right.
Yeah, it was amazing to me because in my country is basically flat. So
I see.
We don't have anything like that. So yeah, it was kind of cool.
And so a quick note to the viewers. Now, do you viewers understand what's happening right here? We've just spent the last several minutes just talking about various features that we find interesting with our own and each other's locations, which does stuff like make me want to go to Minsk and visit there. And all of this is sort of a form of nationalism. Is it because we're evil and because we hate each other? No, we have better things to do with our lives. Like interesting stuff, like talk about what it's like driving up giant mountains by Flagstaff, Arizona, right?
Yeah.
And by the way,
I remember you called me white, and again, I wish to reiterate that I'm one half Asian. So
oh, that's right.
That's right. You cannot play that card on me.
You're right. You're right.
I have my privilege.
You're right. You're a person of color.
And you oppress me with your stupid American whiteness.
Sorry, I apologize.
You have to apologize. Stand on your knees.
You are a person of color. I always forget. I was just talking about like your skin tone. Your skin tone is.
It's kind of yellowish white because I'm half Asian.
Is that so? All right.
Yeah.
Well. I don't know what to say then. I was just downstairs and I was looking at my tan, where the tan line is on my leg from my cycling shorts, and this one here, and I was going, I thought I could get darker than this. I think I may be even whiter than
I mean, you cannot wash off this white guilt from yourself just as easily,
I like the vitamin D though. The vitamin D really, it does wonders for inflammation. It makes me less likely to get the Rona because I'm really, really scared about that.
Yeah. By the way, speaking about that, I think there were some statistics. I looked it up that blacks actually get more.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's because of the deficiency of vitamin D. I mean, natural because of the skin color.
Yeah.
I think there is definitely a connection here.
I think so. I agree.
This is only my personal opinion.
I've heard quite a few different fairly reliable sources. I know one of Joe Rogan's guests talked about that exact thing you just said, and I probably read a paper or two. And for you viewers out there, we've got a 31 plus page section at smAsho.com/forum about this. We started covering it on there almost every day starting January 23rd. So we have this massive timeline. And I didn't just put links, I copy pasted the entire articles whenever possible. So there's a ton of information showing you a long timeline of what went on starting in late January. Long before there were any lockdowns or mask-wearing mandates or anything like that. Which brings me to another point about Belarus. I was enamored when I heard that the Prime Minister of Belarus came out and he said to the press, we cure coronavirus. We determine you go sauna and vodka. I think you drink vodka in the sauna or something, and that's the cure. End of story. Can we just all go back to normal now?
It wasn't the Prime Minister though.
Oh, it wasn't?
Prime Minister has literally zero power here. It was the president.
Man. Oh, the president. Okay. Well.
Yeah, that idiot who rules us for 26 years already. And again,
right.
In a month we're having an election, but he already put in prison 2 main candidates against him.
He already put in prison the 2 main candidates.
It's gonna get funny here. That's what I'm saying. There's gonna be probably riots on the streets because people are so pissed off already.
Right.
Anyway, in my country there were no regulations whatsoever on the government level against the corona. So, and a lot of people think it's bad because a lot of people are concerned, and so nobody really knows what's going on. There's rumors that like all the hospitals are filled with dying people, but nobody really knows what's going on, and I don't know.
Doesn't anybody know somebody who works in the hospital? Aren't they staffed by hundreds and hundreds?
Again, that's all on the level of rumors. Like, my friend's wife is a nurse, for example, but even she doesn't know what's going on. So,
right.
I cannot tell you. So
she's on a need-to-know basis, so she only knows what's going on a little bit with patients on her floor, and that's it. Yeah, I get that.
So nobody really knows what's going on, and well, me personally, I just don't care at all. Like, I don't wear a mask, I don't wear gloves or whatever. I just go to work, go to the stores, etc. I don't care.
Oh, really?
Like, yeah. I mean,
that sounds.
It's my personal philosophical position that I've accepted that I'm mortal and I can die at any moment, so I don't care.
Yeah, and this is a problem with the whole coronavirus, because this idea that you're going to do anything to, quote, make yourself safe. It's like if you go out and do things, you are in way more danger than you are if you're sitting around at home. Like, you're doing, like Americans, everybody drives a car practically every day. You know, a huge portion of the U.S. population drives every day. The amount of statistical danger that they're in by driving a car, pro athletes are more likely to be struck by lightning than killed by coronavirus. Did you know?
Well, again, I've calculated the average mortality, like allegedly due to corona, and it's roughly 1% or 1.5% maybe at best, with respect to all other causes. So it's like, again, you'll probably die of something else anyway, rather than this thing. So yeah, but again, we don't really know what's going on. There's so much hype about it, so there's so much disinformation and so much conspiracy theories and whatnot, so nobody really knows what's going on anymore. I mean, probably in like February or March, you could have figured something out, but right now you can't. There's just so, like, piles of shit, on this topic.
Okay, so just to segue back to nationalism, speaking of piles of shit, Belarus really sounds like it sucks. What is it like being a country so subservient to the U.S. in terms of we having, like, so many more cases than you? Like try to catch up. I mean, per capita cases, you guys are like, it's like we have way more cases than everybody, so, like, don't even make us try to compete. What say you about nationalism regarding COVID?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, some people say that we are actually one of the worst countries in this respect, but I don't really know. I don't see anyone sick around me. Nobody died, etc. So it all seems like some red flag.
Like hype. Yeah, and
unintended, so to speak.
I just saw a study not more than 2 or 3 days ago that said Belarus was one of the countries that fared the best, and a lot of people are attributing it to the fact that they're probably reaching herd immunity because they instituted no mandates, lockdowns, mask wearing.
Who knows? Again, as I've said, there's so much misinformation that it's impossible to figure out.
Every piece of data has been
literally impossible to figure out.
Yeah.
Like, you just have to go away from it completely. There's no point. I had a video in March about coronavirus, and I've said there that it's basically just better to forget about the topic altogether, because it's literally pointless to talk about it even, because it's just something that happens to you, and whatever. Just forget about it.
I think that the danger of infectious diseases, if I could do everything exactly the same as I did it in December, when I go to the grocery store and I buy all my stuff and I hope nobody coughs on me, and then when I get to the cashier I pay for everything and I leave, I go home, I put everything away, and then I wash my hands, and that's it. I don't have to do anything besides that. And if it were up to me, I'd still be doing the same things. So what else do we have to say about nationalism? What about other misconceptions, perhaps?
Well, I just wanted to talk about the perhaps historical/cultural roots of nationalism.
Oh, right, yeah.
Might be interesting. So
yes, please, like the Nazi Party.
Essentially is an ideology or an idea, if you like, that national well-being, maybe, or prosperity is the way to go. So it's what you should strive for. And it only appeared, interestingly enough, in the beginning of the 19th century. So it's a very new type of idea. When roughly, I can even give you a time.
Everybody was ruled by kings before that, so they had essentially no control over their government, right?
Before nations, we've had kingdoms and empires and feudalism and stuff like that, and people were subjects of a king or an emperor. And what is an emperor? It's basically a guy with a huge army who controls a lot of land.
Everybody has disdain for their country as opposed to nationalism.
Not exactly, not necessarily, but anyway. Then nations appeared, and nations are a product of this industrial age of the 19th century, roughly speaking. So I can give you a rough estimate when nationalism appeared, and that was 1806, I think, when Napoleon abolished the Roman Empire. He dismantled it. Of course, it's called Holy Roman Empire, but I think, with my bizarre view of history, I think it was actually the Roman Empire that we know, which was basically Germany, current Germany, Austria, and northern Italy. That was the Holy Roman Empire. So Napoleon dismantled this contraption, and so a lot of people were kind of left with nothing afterwards. So they had to figure out how to live on afterwards, basically. Right. So a lot of nationalistic movements appeared. For example, Italy. Well, you think, well, Italians are really old people, like they were there for thousands of years. Well, no, Italy appeared in 1866. So that was less than 1.5 centuries ago.
And Italy is a huge melting pot as far as the European countries, right? There's a massive amount of different
there was this,
genetics.
As they call it, risorgimento, which means kind of like resurgement, if there's such a word in English, reappearance, basically. So they had this huge national movement, again, national in the full sense of the word, so it was under nationalistic propaganda, etc., of course supported by the British spies like Garibaldi, etc., who went on to Sicily with an army, etc., and kind of took over the government. But anyway,
Oh.
So they appeared in 1860s, and there is a famous quote by an Italian politician, Massimo d'Azeglio, again, the quote is from 1866. Just think about it. He said, "We've created Italy," when they were already unified, like created the government, etc. And he said, "We've created Italy. Now we need to create Italians." So there was no such nation as Italians in even 1860.
Oh, right. So their national identity is very, very new.
Yes, exactly. So, and Italy is a very developed country.
Right. I mean, it's very sophisticated.
Yes, it's very sophisticated, very regional oriented, very federal. You might say.
Maybe that's why they like cycling so much there, Eugene.
Historically, they were just a bunch of policies, like Greek-like policies. So it wasn't a single entity at any time in history before that. So they had to create Italians, like literally, like do something. And what they did is, for example, they unified the language. So they took the Florence, Firenze dialect, and like produced the books for schools, etc., which taught everyone in the whole country this dialect, or rather like some refined version of it.
Yeah, I get that.
So they produced a single language, even to this day, like places like Sardinia, this island, or Sicily, they had their own dialects and whatever, but they unified the language pretty much politically.
Yeah. And it's the whole country is very regional. So if you go to an alpine place, that's totally different than if you go to a place in the southern, like on the Mediterranean or Sicily or something.
Again, in Italy, there's a place, for example, called Bolzano, near the border with Austria, I think, where basically people speak German. They don't care about it.
Oh yeah, I know. Yep, exactly.
About the government language. Anyway,
and there's parts of Germany that speak Italian too, and parts of Switzerland that speak Italian.
Yeah. Well, Switzerland is basically, they have 4 government languages, and these are German, Italian, French, and what they call Retro-Romanish, which means like retro-Roman.
Really? I didn't know about that last one.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of a relic from, again, sort of Roman times.
That's weird. I did not know about that. I thought it was just French, Italian, and German.
No, there's a 4th one also. But anyway, so what I'm saying is nations were artificially created, essentially, in 19th century, or in 20th, some of the later ones, like India or China, probably the largest nations today, they were created in the 20th century. But major European nations, such as, for example, Germans, Italians, French, they were all created in the 19th century. So it's a very new thing,
Right.
And again, roughly speaking, you might say post-Napoleonic thing, because in Napoleon's times, it was all about empires. It was the British Empire, the French Empire. Germany was non-existent back then. It was Holy Roman Empire. Then Russian Empire. Then, by the way, United States is a unique case in this respect, because United States appeared before this time, before nationalism. So United States wasn't a national state initially, right? So it was more of a collective of people who want to live their own lives, so to speak, without any other person above them. So it was kind of a cool idea, and it kind of worked. But I would say that roughly at the time of the Civil War, so again 1860s, is when you've turned into a national state. So when the Union overtook the whole U.S., when the Union won the Civil War, it strengthened the federal government, and it started this process of turning into a national state. And of course, it finished at the beginning of the First World War, when you had the Fed instituted, etc. So you became just one typical national state as all the others in the world, more or less. So yeah, but there are also interesting cases like India, which isn't a national state even to this day, even though it claims to be, because there's no such thing as Indian guy. I mean, properly, not talking about Native Americans. I'm talking about people from India. So you probably know that in India there's like, I think 2,000 different languages in the country. I mean,
is there really? Oh my gosh.
There's like, it's so diverse and so federal in the first place that
I wouldn't go. I wouldn't go unless I like had a really trusted contact there. I would not go there as a tourist. I wouldn't dream of it.
Well, why wouldn't you dream about it? There's it's a meme, of course, from the internet, but there are designated shitting streets there.
So well, in that case, book my flight.
Specifically designed for people to shit there.
In that case, book my flight, man.
Doesn't that sound exciting?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm not anti-Indian. Just that
yeah.
It's kind of hilarious. But anyway, so what I'm saying is that even idiots like Emanuel Wallerstein, who I detest a lot because his theories are rubbish, but even him...
Well, who's that? Who's that for me and the viewers? Because I have no idea who that is.
Okay, so he's a geopolitician, in air quotes, who developed a theory which is called... Damn, I don't know the proper English title for it, but like world system, I guess, world-system.
Oh, okay.
Approach, which is, well, it's just another instance of socialistic thinking, basically.
Some kind of world government format.
Yeah. So even he had an article recently, like maybe 10 years ago or something. Does India exist?
Oh no.
So, and the point was that India is so federalized that there's no such thing as India. You know, there's just a bunch of these states. They're literally called states in India. So yeah, and it makes sense, and it's cool because, again, with regards to China, which is super centralized,
right,
India has a lot of advantages because they're decentralized.
Each state is very different than the other, perhaps.
Yeah, and if you look, and it's because of the weakness of Indian federal government, they have much more advantages in terms of economics. They can advance the market, etc. So the federal government cannot control anything in India because it's very weak, because it's inherently very federalized. So if you look at the economic
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
In India, it's much higher than China.
And
why? Well, because China is very centralized and India is not. So it's very cool.
And just to clarify for the viewers, when he's saying federalized, he doesn't mean centralized. He means the opposite of centralized, where the individual states have more powers, similar to the way it's supposed to be in the U.S. Now, in the U.S., it still is largely on paper that way. The federal government obviously has done many things that are outside of its constitutional allowances, but that's perhaps for a different episode.
Mm-hmm. There's, by the way, a strong movement today in Russia to become more federalized, meaning more power to the local governments. And it's a really smart thing to do, I believe, because Russia is so huge and there are so many different areas there. I mean, they span from like subarctic climate to like subtropical almost climate, etc. And it's the largest country in the world.
The idea that somebody's going to have the ability to sort of make some blanket thing like everybody must wear masks in Siberia, where the population density is 1 person per every 62 square miles or something.
Yeah, absolutely, and people acknowledge that today. I mean,
what does Putin have to say about it? Is Putin on the side of this, or is Putin anti this, or is Putin pro this?
Well, Putin obviously is for the strong centralized government, so it's anti.
He's inherently anti this. Okay.
Yes, of course.
You don't even have to. You don't even have to like look up his opinion. You just know.
Yeah.
Okay.
But people more and more acknowledge this, and it makes absolutely a lot of sense. So but of course there's a government propaganda against these ideas. They're saying, oh, they want to dissolve our country. We're gonna lose I don't know, Kamchatka or Siberia because
right.
And the U.S. are going to invade.
They're going to have all these volcanoes to themselves, and we're
yeah. So, but
anyway. So anyway, now you're talking about your neighbors. Now I've got something to say about my neighbors. Shout out to all those dudes up there in Canada, Electric View types. The beer is fantastic, and this episode is brought to you by the crisp and refreshing Moosehead Lager, a Canadian classic, which was recommended by my local beer distributor. And I'm kidding, it's not brought to you by that. I bought it. But anyway, the beer's great. And I hear the northern pike fishing is fantastic also. Another reason why nationalism seems like a good thing, because if they didn't want to tell me about how good the northern pike fishing is, why would I try to go book some kind of a crazy getaway and go rent a cabin some lake that's fished by 4 people per year? So yeah, anyway, I guess I think we should probably close out.
Well, there's still a couple of things I wanted to talk about.
Okay, yeah, let's go.
So
you go for it.
I talked about history and Napoleon and dismantling of the Roman Empire, etc. One other important, very important thing that happened at that time, roughly 1820s, let's say 1810s, was in culture, the beginning of epoch of Romanticism. So what was Romanticism? It's essentially, there's a lot of stuff to it, and it happened everywhere, like in paintings, in poetry especially, in literature, etc.
Can I just hold you up and go backwards here for a second? I apologize, but wouldn't you say there was a sense of nationalism in a place like Babylonia or a place like the Greek or Roman Empire, or would you say now we're coming into question the term nation?
Yeah, well, firstly, there was no Greek Empire. It's not a thing at all. Ancient Greece was a bunch of policies. Again, Athens, Sparta, Epirus, whatever. Those are probably the 3 most famous ones.
They were just loosely aligned city-states.
Obviously. So each polis had their citizens, and they frequently waged war on each other, etc. So
I see.
It wasn't a centralized thing at all, seriously.
I see.
Syracuse, where Archimedes lived, or allegedly, supposedly lived. Rome was a different story, indeed. That was kind of but that was an empire.
It's not really a nation, because the difference between
it's not a nation. If you look at the map of the Roman Empire, it encompassed all of the Mediterranean. So how can you say that it was a single nation? I mean, it's just stupid.
I get that.
Nationalism really is a modern concept derived from the fruits of, let's say, Industrial Revolution. So it's a 19th century concept. It wasn't existed. Even in English, the term nationalism only appeared in 1844. So just think about it.
Okay.
So it's only a century and a half old. Not more than that.
From the Slav people forged into a Yugoslavia without fusing into a Yugoslav nation.
There was no such thing as Yugoslav nation. In Yugoslavia, it was actually a good country, from my estimate. You probably remember, you were old enough to remember when Milosevic was on trial.
Oh, sure, yeah.
When the U.S. bombed Yugoslavia.
Around 96 or something like that, I think it was.
It was 1999, I think.
Was it that late?
Very recent.
But yes, I do remember the whole Herzegovina, Bosnia situation.
Yeah, Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's actually a separate country right now.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty recent thing too, right?
Yeah, again, 20 years ago, roughly speaking.
And is it a good place to go on vacation, Eugene?
Croatia is a very good place to go because it's on this Adriatic Sea, but...
I used to game with a kid from Croatia. He's probably about 20 by now.
But again, Croatians hate Serbians because, Croatians are Catholics, as far as I understand. And Serbians are
I think you're right.
Orthodox. So
I think you're right.
Balkans are really a shithole. they constantly fight each other, etc. Yugoslavia was the place that kind of united them all, without, like, it was really an empire in a sense, because it had all those different peoples living together. But when Yugoslavia went to shithole because of the US and whatever, it all broke down. So right now they're all separated and they hate each other. So yeah. So it's a bad story, really. It's a very sad story.
So anyway, sorry to interrupt you going forward with the nations.
I was talking about Romanticism, and it's very important, I believe, with regards to nationalism. So what I was talking about is that Romanticism appeared roughly in the 1810s, 20s, roughly speaking. And again, you can Google that, Romanticism in art, and it's one of the strongest, how do you say it, tendencies in art at all. Like it was probably the strongest motion in art. So what it embraced was this sort of primeval demonic power, sort of. And it was the root of these nationalistic motions. So, for example, George? Maybe John Gordon Byron, the British poet, he was claiming that he is like of Scottish roots, of some sort of like Scottish knights or whatever crap like that. So he made up his own story to like emphasize his own romantic power, let's say, like vigor. So he said, I'm of this earth. I have roots in these, Highlanders spirit. So I am a good guy. I'm a strong guy. So he had all this poetry, and then he drowned in a boat somewhere near Italy or whatever. So
he was a bad Viking then, in other words.
Yeah, sort of. So this whole imagery of being down to earth, being close to the native people, it all appeared in Romanticism. So all over Europe, people started fantasizing about their past and like glorifying their past to develop their nations. Like, again, it's a very funny case, a very curious case. Like Prosper Mérimée, the French writer, he said, he confessed rather, that he wrote a book of Balkan poetry just by himself. And it was called La Guzla, which means like one of their Slavic musical instruments. But anyway, so what he said is that he wanted to go to Baltic countries to collect folklore, and then like write a book about it. But he didn't have the money, so what he decided to do instead is to write a book about Balkan folklore, and then on the money he received from that to go to the Balkans. So he just completely made up a lot of stories, like a lot of folklore from Balkans, just on his own, and published it anonymously. And only like maybe 20 years after he admitted that he did that it was his book, it wasn't a genuine Balkan folklore. But if he didn't admit that, we'd probably even today
you would believe it's legit folklore,
genuine Balkan folklore. So this is how it was all created. It was all created in the 19th century. Like all of the folk, like look at the Germany. Like
basically what you're saying is this is how thrown together this was. If he hadn't admitted it, the whole culture is so thrown together, and nobody has any idea what anybody's customs or folklore is in the first place. If he hadn't admitted it, you wouldn't know, because everybody was like, I never heard that one, but maybe that guy down the street came up, like maybe that's part of his spoken history of the culture or something.
And
that's weird.
If an artist has like
and cool kind of
understanding of what the people are about, they can come up with stuff that they can relate to, So it's not that hard as you can think it.
A little kernel of truth, and you can make somebody believe some complete nonsense. I've noticed this. If you ever looked at YouTube videos, you may find a few kernels of truth and a few truckloads of nonsense, all mixed together.
I kind of remember this video you sent me about the aliens disguising as birds. It just kind of makes me laugh every time I think
Oh, you should subscribe to her channel, because every day it's something different. Like one of the ones was look at these ships, and what she was looking at was like a partial sunset where most of the sky was clouds, but there were like big holes in the clouds. So she was looking at the kind of yellowish sky behind the gray clouds in the foreground, and stating that the empty space was spaceships and things. And there was one with the recent coronal mass ejection on the eastern limb of the sun. It was like maybe 10 days ago or something like that. And she, of course, put up a video that there's a spaceship pulling something out of the sun or coming out of the sun or something like that. And I try to leave a nice comment one of the days.
Yeah, that sounds kind of cool.
I left derogatory comments all the other days.
But anyway, so I wish to probably make another comment about Germans. So Germany
right.
wasn't even a thing. Yeah, maybe I'll invoke some tanks into my hometown.
Whatever, you half Asian nationalist.
Yeah, they'll purge me out of existence. But anyway,
you like France and Italy better than your own country, so I guess you're a French-Italian
like
half Asian nationalist.
I don't like Germany, by the way. Although, like, intellectually,
Germany's amazing.
Like Germany, but all the Germans I've met are actually really cool people. Like, seriously.
Yeah, Germany is awesome. I've been there.
Germans are cool. Like, seriously. I detest Germany, but Germans as people are very cool. But
yeah,
anyway,
but it's like saying I detest Russia. Like, saying I detest Russia means I don't like the government, not the populace.
As I'm saying, like the concept of Germany.
I get what you're saying.
Intellectual idea of Germany is detesting to me, but Germans,
and it's run by Angela Merkel
on an individual level at least. But anyway, so what I'm saying is Germany didn't exist until Bismarck, the chancellor, who created it roughly.
I don't know, but I'm going to take your word on it. My European history is like nowhere near.
Yeah.
I never took a college course on that, so I don't know.
No problem. Much. I mean, I live in Europe, so it's a big thing for us, especially since Germany fucked us over like at least 3 times. First time was Teutonic Order, who came here to kill all the infidels. Then there was a First World War. Actually, there was a division of Rzeczpospolita, which was a Commonwealth of Lithuania and Poland. So Germans also fucked us then. So it was probably four times in a row. But anyway, so,
okay. Fair enough.
It was created in 1860s, roughly.
Okay.
So it's a very new nation again. There was Prussia, which was very strong again and acknowledged by everyone in Europe. I mean, after Friedrich the Great, Friedrich II, who basically fucked everyone in Europe who opposed him. Like, he fucked Austrians, he fucked French. Like, he was just such a brilliant tactician, like military commander. He just destroyed everyone, like literally. There was one occasion, and he was in France with all the major people in Europe, like French philosopher Voltaire, for example, who was, by the way, one of the promoters of Newton's gravity. Like, Newton wouldn't have such an impact in Europe if not for Voltaire. Like, he was one of the most recognized people in Europe, and he promoted Newton quite a lot. So anyway, so he was friends with Friedrich the Great, and Friedrich fucked everyone in Europe. So he made Prussia the thing in like late 1700s, let's say. So there was one occasion when Prince Soubise from Austria, I think, he tried to destroy Friedrich's army, and the odds were horrible for Friedrich. It was like almost 10-1 or 5-1 at least. And Friedrich killed him. Killed his army. Like, just destroyed him. It was such a disaster for Austrians, and the Prussians won, and yeah, they became a thing. So Germany united under Prussia, afterwards, like 100 years later, roughly.
And thanks, by the way, thanks for telling me that. I always wondered what that was, what Prussia was. Again, not an expert in European history by any, not even an amateur in European history.
Well, Prussia is, roughly speaking, one half Slavic, one half German.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
It's northeast of Germany, like roughly at the border with Poland and at the edge of the Baltic Sea.
Like north of Czechia.
Well, roughly where Berlin is, but even
right.
Well, Berlin probably was the capital. I'm not sure. I'm not kind of in the dark here myself, but
yeah, that's fine.
Brandenburg was probably the capital of Prussia, but I might be mistaken.
Well, it's neither here nor there, right?
But Berlin and Brandenburg are basically the same thing. They're very close. But anyway, so Germany was created then in 1860s, and it was called the Second Reich. You know, Hitler called his empire the Third Reich.
Right.
And the First Reich is considered to be the Carolus Magnus, how you call it, Karl the Great Empire from like supposedly 8th century.
the one who Hitler was trying to like bring his ghost back and animate a suit of armor to become a super soldier and drive his best tanks or something, you know.
Yeah, probably.
Create an anti-gravitic device and fly over Washington D.C.
So the First Reich was Karl the Great, the Second Reich was Bismarck's, this late 19th century, and the Third Reich was Hitler. So this was the Second Reich when Germany was really established. When they fucked the French in their asses in 1871, I think.
All right.
It was a Franco-Prussian war when the Germans just demolished the French, just completely destroyed them. And they overtook this famous Alsace and Lorraine area where, you know, Strasbourg is. And so they took over these iron and coal mines there, etc. So,
by the way, let me just pause you.
Was established. That's what I'm saying. So Germans wasn't a thing before that.
Right.
There was not. Again, Germany is very, federalized, very dissolved. You have, let's say, just plainly, simply speaking, you have Rhine. You know, this river Rhine, or how do you call it in English?
Rhine.
Rhine.
No, Rhine.
Whatever.
Yeah.
It's the most important river in Germany.
I've been there.
In the west. So there's.
I've been to Köln and Dusseldorf and Bonn and so on.
Yeah, there's main coal and iron things there and gas and whatever. So this Rhine area is mostly Catholic. Bayern, Bavaria is mostly Catholic.
Yeah.
And all the Nuremberg, by the way, and all the other Germany, northeast mostly is mostly Protestant. So
yeah, it makes sense.
They're very divisive, whatever, federalized. So yeah, and even now Germany is a federal republic. It's not a uniform, type of thing. So
and let's go back to France for a quick second.
Let me just finish with this point. So Germany wasn't a thing. There was no such thing as Germany until 1860s. That's what I want.
Yeah, I get that. So let's just go back.
The German nation appeared roughly when Italian nation appeared. So 1860s. So it's not a new thing. Well, rather no. It's
not an old thing.
It's not an old thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to continue this, but I wish to add this.
No, by all means.
I wanted to tell you.
We try to have an open forum.
Yeah. So this saga of Nibelungen, or how do you call it? Richard Wagner, by the way, has an opera about this Ring of Nibelungen or something like that. So this saga of Nibelungen appeared at the end of the 18th century, I think. It was, in air quotes, like super bald air quotes, discovered at the end of the 18th century.
Okay.
But it probably was written by some romantic idiot at that time, and it corresponded to this epoch when Germany Prussia specifically was becoming more and more powerful. So they wanted to have a longer history to relate to,
Oh,
so
geez.
they wrote this piece of shit, and they said, oh, we have hundreds and thousands of years of history. And the same thing appeared in Russia roughly at the same time, roughly at the Napoleonic age. It's called in Russian Slova Polku Igorevi, which roughly means a sage or saying about the war efforts of Igor, where Igor is one of the guys, the main guy actually there. So it was, again, in huge air quotes, discovered in the year roughly 1810 or something. And it talks about this hypothetical legendary character of Igor, who fought some evil villains for the Russia in like the year 800, roughly speaking. So it's all just completely invented out of the blue in this epoch of Romanticism. That's what I wanted to say.
I see what you're saying. It was.
This is my point. So
an act of fiction that was discovered.
Let me just wrap this whole thing up. So nationalism was invented in 19th century, like roughly first half of 19th century, and people deliberately, a lot of smart people, I'm not telling that they were stupid or anything, a lot of smart people devoted a lot of their effort to produce a lot of history behind that. So they said our nation existed for 2000s of years before that. We have all this eposes and poetry and paintings and whatever and sayings. So they produced it all in the first half of the 19th century, roughly speaking. I'm not saying it's all counterfeit.
Not like it's necessarily fake, but it's a bit overinflated,
yes,
perhaps.
A lot of it.
Dramatized to keep people's attention and so on. As we know, our most interesting teachers are all the ones who act like real goofs in front of the class. You tend to remember the most from those classes. So, if you tell a boring story, it's not going to be remembered. Somebody might not remember what you said, but they might remember how you made them feel, right?
Yeah, probably. But anyway, that was my point. That nationalism is a new thing. That's one point. The second point is that nationalism was invented in 19th century. Again, it's not a new thing. And a lot of people devoted their efforts to developing it. And yeah, pretty much that's it. Like again, the modern nations, huge nations such as India and China, they weren't even around until 1940.
All right, I got it.
That's
so
like 70 years ago.
So the burning question is it bad in your opinion? As I stated at the beginning of the video, I don't see anything wrong with it particularly. I think it's probably a benefit to societies that are trying to interact with each other, as it characterizes people and sort of gives you some idea of what to expect, for instance, right? And why is it so scary to be referred to as a nationalist now? Like, if you post something on social media and somebody says, you sound like a nationalist, it's like, it's just this side of being called a racist, right? Why? It makes no sense to me.
Well, I think to answer your second question, it's more of an American thing because, well, in my country, well, actually, it's kind of different in my country. When to be a nationalist, it basically means to be in opposition to the government, but it's a very different story.
I see. You have this ongoing revolutionary mindset because you've had the same.
There is this strict association of nationalism in my country. I mean, specifically with this flag, this white, red, white, and with this anti-current president type of agenda. So it's completely. So
that makes sense.
Anyway, I would say that it's okay to be nationalist if you're a nationalist just by your own belief. Like if you think, well, my people deserve better, let's say, well, it's completely okay. But again, if it doesn't disrupt, let's say, international trade, if you don't forcefully introduce any sort of regulations on the trade or motion of people or motion of capital, etc., then it's completely okay. Like if you let's say own a factory where people work and you prefer to hire people of your nationality, it's completely okay. Like what's wrong with it? It's your choice. It's their choice. Like no one suffers from. Well, maybe somebody suffers from that, but again.
Yeah, but hiring people that are of the same national origin as you isn't necessarily nationalism. That's not necessarily a promotion of your country.
What I'm saying is, in this case, your nationalism is your personal preference. It is this nationalism that I would promote. I would say that if you're a nationalist in your heart, then be one. Like, what's the problem? It's not a problem.
Yeah, if I called you every day and you're like, Belarus is the best, I'd be like, oh, okay. I wouldn't be offended. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't see what the big deal is. It's like...
Yeah, exactly. But the problem arises when your state forcefully, with the help of police, courts, and army, starts to, forcefully force you to do something for their nation.
Oppress
or at least, and that's the worst part, is that they're saying it's for your nation, as again in the example of banning foreign cars, for example. They're saying it's for our nation, whereas in fact it's for some small group of lobbyists.
Sure, and it causes the government to get paid more via taxes, and it causes everybody to get higher prices and worse products simultaneously.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
Totally a misallocation of resources.
It's this hypocrisy which is sick, in my opinion. So unless you force any nationalistic thing violently through the government, nationalism is okay with me. Like you can have any opinion you want and even promote it through your actions, but unless it's forced on me, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I think the economic implications of saying first of all, again, I don't think tariffs should be considered nationalism, and I realize that people will blindly support a certain political figure.
Cronyism, really.
Yeah, it's exactly, and I realize that certain people will support a certain political figure, and that certain political figure supports a certain tariff because of whatever reasons, usually some sort of corporate interest or lobbies, like you said, and then you get like half the people that are blindly backing a tariff because a political figure is endorsing a tariff, and I'm totally anti-government interference in the economy. Now, of course, there has to be some form of regulation to prevent things like securities fraud and things where you just have a complete tilt toward tyranny. But again, that's probably for another episode, like a special "How big should the government be?" or something like that.
For an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But anyway, so one thing I wanted to add at the end is that you see, governments utilize nationalism as a tool of fooling their electorate, essentially.
Yeah.
So they're saying, we're doing this for you, whereas in fact, what it benefits is their friends, the lobbyists and major corporations. So
I think that's a good point. Yeah.
In itself is a good sentiment. I mean, what's bad in loving your country? But
it's cronyism disguised as lobbyism.
The government, fucks you over for some good, reasons, supposedly.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so anything else to add? We got to close this thing out. It's pushing an hour and 10 minutes. So, anything else to add?
No, I don't think so. I think I've ranted enough.
All right. Well,
so thank you again for having me.
Thanks for stopping by once again. For all you viewers out there, don't forget to go subscribe to Eugene the Philostopher. And by the way, I added the T to your title on the thumbnail. I don't know if you noticed that, but I had it misspelled on the last one, so now I've got that T in there for the Philostopher. So thanks again.
Okay.
And let's do another one soon, perhaps about condensed matter or something. What do you say?
Well,
not to put you on the spot or anything.
Okay. Well, goodbye. Thank you.
All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.